Hello again, Michael Ware with the Iowa Firearms Coalition. I've got a special panel today. We're joined by Representative Steve Holt, IFC's lobbyist Richard Rogers, and NRA-ILA State Director and lobbyist Scott Jones. Let's get into the thick of it here. We wanted to talk a little bit about what we've seen in the Iowa House recently. Steve Holt, can you bring us up to speed, please?
Yes, absolutely. So we did two monumental pieces of legislation this week to protect the Second Amendment rights of Iowa citizens, and I was honored to floor manage and be involved in helping write both of those bills. First one was establishing some protections for our gun manufacturers and ammunition manufacturers in Iowa from frivolous lawsuits that are meant to put them out of business. And then we had an omnibus extensive Second Amendment bill that did a number of things, and folks are excited about the fact that it creates constitutional carry in the state of Iowa. But it does a number of other things. It allows EMTs that are assigned to tactical teams to be able to get some training and carry, get a professional permit to carry. That would make them safer, as well as the tactical team that they're attached to. The bill would allow police officers off duty to also be able to carry on school grounds, and reserve officers to also be able to carry on school grounds. Again, we believe that the folks that you want armed in the school obviously are trained police officers that could respond in the event of an emergency, whether they're on duty or off. And so we think that's a very important piece to make our schools safer. And then we mandated in this bill that those who are in landlords that have Section 8 housing or housing agreements where they're getting rental assistance from the federal government should not be allowed to prevent those individuals from practicing their Second Amendment rights because, you know, we don't believe that right should be based on economic status. And so we think that's an important piece. And then, of course, we created a situation where the permit process would be optional in Iowa. That would allow individuals to get the background check and carry without that permit, effectively creating what a number of us have worked for a lot of years, which is constitutional carry in the state of Iowa. We think that the way that we crafted that could actually increase the number of background checks, and taken in total, we believe that our citizens will be safer, not less safe. And one of the things I keep coming back on is the idea that if somebody suddenly feels that they're unsafe for whatever reason, maybe there's a riot in their community and the police are overwhelmed, maybe they've got a stalker or what have you, under the current system that have to go to the sheriff, fill out the paperwork, wait for the approval process. Under this new scenario that we hope will become law, that individual could go straight to the firearms store, to the gun store, get that background check done, and be able to have that firearm for self-defense in a short period of time. The Second Amendment is a fundamental constitutional right that, and I've said this many times, citizens should not have to get a permission slip and pay a fee to practice. So we believe this bill will make Iowans safer while also respecting personal responsibility, character, and the fundamental right that all Americans are granted by the Second Amendment.
Fantastic. Thank you. Scott Jones, what are your thoughts?
Well, thank you, Michael, and Representative Holt. I appreciate you joining us. It's been tremendous to work with you this session, and IFC. You know, you've done a great job with your colleagues in the Iowa legislature in general. You've done a tremendous job this session delivering on your campaign promises to protect, defend, and uphold the Second Amendment to the Constitution. I think you're doing a fantastic job. I'll back up about a month when you all passed Senate Joint Resolution 7. You know, we've worked on that for a number of years now. It was the third time the House has passed it. That's our Freedom Amendment, or the Right to Keep and Bear Arms Constitutional Amendment. That'll go to a vote in November of 2022. We're really, really excited to get folks turned out to vote for that amendment. It'll be fantastic. That leads us into, as you mentioned, House File 621, which protects firearms dealers, manufacturers, etc., from frivolous lawsuits. That's very, it resembles very closely the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act at the federal level, which we know the Biden administration would like to repeal. So it's very important we have that protection here at the state level in Iowa. And that leads us to Wednesday night's historic vote on 756. Representative Holt, you touched on the number of provisions that bill codifies. It goes to the Senate on Monday. I believe they'll hear it. But most importantly, it gives you as Iowans the freedom and the responsibility to exercise these fundamental rights without, you know, navigating government red tape and delays. It's incredibly vital and important. This is my fourth session now in Iowa. We've worked at each session. And this just happened to be the year that we were able to get it across the finish line so far in the House. We've still got our work to do, but we're excited about the prospects of it. And it's again, been great working with you, and I look forward to what else we can accomplish.
I agree. This has been a priority of mine for 7 years. I've been in the House. I know Leader Winchell, Matt Winchell, the majority leader has been working on this for over a decade. He was so excited that it passed. We have an amazing group of freshman legislators. I have to tell you that I have, in my 7 years here, I've never seen such a group of freshman legislators that came here based on principle. They went to Des Moines because they wanted to do something. And I've heard several of them say, you know, if I get 2 years, I get 2 years. I didn't come here to be a placeholder. And that is very obvious in the fact that every single Republican voted for that omnibus bill to establish constitutional carry in the state of Iowa in the House. And we didn't have the votes 2 years ago to do it. And so we have that's what folks need to understand. I hear a lot of people get very frustrated about Republicans in Washington, D.C. not advancing our principles or not standing by our principles. I've never seen in my 7 years a group like we have right now that want to walk the walk, talk the talk, and walk the walk. They want to go to Des Moines and they're going to do exactly what they said they were going to do on the campaign trail, whether that's dealing with the divisive Marxist concepts that are being taught in our schools that we're stopping, or the Second Amendment. They are really standing up for American values and doing exactly what they promised they were going to do. The citizens of Iowa gave us a 59-seat majority, gave us 59 seats in the Iowa House, and they expected us to do what we said we were going to do. I started talking publicly more and more about constitutional carry after the riots and the stuff we've seen across our country, where we saw that law enforcement agencies either were unable to respond because they were overwhelmed, or they couldn't respond because they were told by government officials not to respond for political reasons. Is absolutely unacceptable when the fundamental responsibility of government is to protect citizens. So I think the reason we have seen an increase in gun sales are for those very reasons, that people recognize they need to, you know, ultimately the responsibility to protect ourselves and our families fall on us. And that is why this is so fundamentally important. And I've just never been more proud of my caucus than I am right now, because we're willing to do the hard stuff this year, and we've done it.
Richard, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Representative Holt for the hard work that he's put on this bill, and also House File 621, the protection for those engaged in firearms commerce against frivolous suits. But I want to pick up on something, and I know he spent a lot of time on this, and maybe we can get into that a little bit later about what it takes to bring a bill like this to the floor. But I want to pick up on something you just mentioned, Representative, and that was that we didn't have the votes a couple of years ago, and how proud you are of your caucus, and particularly the new members. I want to thank you and the 59 other representatives. Unfortunately, there was only one Democrat that voted for the House File 756 the other night. But, you know, in life, in many aspects of life, timing is everything. You mentioned we didn't have the votes 2 years ago. There are a lot of people in our community, the Second Amendment community, that have wanted this for a very long time, and they say it always should have been this way. We should have done this years ago. We shouldn't even bother to go to shall issue. We just should have gotten rid of permits long ago. It never should have happened. Well, that might be true, that permits were the wrong thing, but that was the situation we had. There has never been a time until this moment when we could have done this. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think you could make the compelling argument that the shall issue helped us to get where we are today. You know, sometimes we have to do things incrementally, and people have to get comfortable with things, and then you take the next step. So I have seen that sometimes an incremental process is very important. So while I understand that people didn't like shall issue, you know, may issue was even worse. You know, may issue means you may not issue. And so exactly. Shall issue was an important step to saying, no, you don't get to just tell somebody, you know, they don't get to have a permit because you just decide that because you don't like the Second Amendment. Shall issue meant you will issue it unless there's a legal reason for you not to be able to, because that person is not qualified to carry a firearm. I think that was an important step to get where we are today, because again, you have to, for those who maybe don't look at this quite the same way we do, or don't have the priority that we do with it, it takes a little bit of time to get there. And that, I think shall issue was helpful in that, ultimately in that process to get where we are today. I don't know that we could have jumped from may issue all the way here without having that incremental step.
Absolutely. And I like to point out that a dozen years ago, only 30,000 people across the entire state of Iowa had a permit to carry weapons. And now it's 400,000.
Exactly.
And now it's a common topic of conversation. People understand the issue. At that time, nobody did. Nobody really knew anybody that had a permit to carry. Nobody knew anybody that carried to speak of, and nobody even was aware that you could do it. They thought you had to be a former policeman or something to do it, and that might have been the case because it was up to the sheriffs. So there were many roadblocks in our entire lives, the lives of our parents, our grandparents, and even our great-grandparents in Iowa. Basically, the right to keep bear arms has been treated as a privilege that largely we were prevented from engaging in. We weren't granted the privilege. We won't get into all the thing with May issue, but basically if you were a friend of the sheriff or a contributor, or you were just lucky to have a good sheriff, you might be able to get a permit. But there were so many roadblocks that nobody did it. We have entirely changed the conversation, and that's changed the political ground, and therefore we are able to do this. And so I thank you, because it was this time. There's a lot that goes into creating a bill like this. First of all, you know, you have 20 years in Marines. A lot of our viewers know that you spent 20 years in the Marine Corps, and what they may not know is you have a law enforcement experience after that. Is that correct?
Yes, I was in law enforcement for 4 years when I retired from the Marine Corps. I became a deputy sheriff for actually about 3.5 years. For a short time, I was a police chief in a small town. So yes, I do have about 3.5 years of law enforcement experience.
And there have been concerns expressed. I can tell you, because I've worked with representatives of the law enforcement community and actually law enforcement members in drafting this bill, and I know that you have, and maybe you can talk about that a little bit. But in the debate the other night, there was some language thrown around. I got a little colorful at one point that the Republicans or this bill refused. It didn't back the blue. It wasn't friendly to law enforcement, and in fact, law enforcement had a lot of input to this, and a lot of consideration was given to them. Is that not right?
Actually, everything, to my knowledge, everything that was requested of us by law enforcement, Department of Public Safety, Iowa sheriffs and deputies, virtually everything was put into this bill. They requested that the federal prohibitions be put into state law to make things a little bit easier for them. We did that. There were some reporting things that they asked for so that mental health adjudications will be reported quicker to the system. They would know that in their cars if they pull someone over. So there were a number of things that they requested. We also added to the bill, if you were under the influence of drugs, if you were in the possession of illegal drugs or in the commission of an indictable offense, that invalidated your right to carry until those things were adjudicated in court. So we gave them a number of tools, I guess you would say, that they were concerned about, that, you know, they think the permit currently helps them with what you could call the bad guys in getting them off the streets. And so we were very responsive to that. But ultimately, again, and I've had conversations with a number of law enforcement officers. Some are concerned about it, some understand it and are okay with it. But I had a conversation with a good friend last night, a big Second Amendment advocate, and he was a little bit concerned. I said, look, ultimately, if we are going to, you know, we were talking about freedom and personal responsibility. If we legislate to the lowest common denominator, so to speak, we're not going to have any freedoms left across the board. We can't do that. And so creating all of this onerous code that, you know, begins to penalize law-abiding citizens so we can try to get to the bad guys, we can't do it that way. And so there's already plenty of reasonable suspicion and all of these things that officers have to deal with things. And so I believe we put a number of things into the legislation to satisfy the concerns of law enforcement officers. And let's remember that 18 other states have constitutional carry. We're not reinventing the wheel here. Right. And if there's some tweak we need to make that we overlooked or something, I don't believe we did, because we spent a lot of time on this. But if there is something we need to modify, as long, again, as it doesn't impede on those fundamental rights of the citizens.
Exactly. You listen to them. You listen to them. You address their concerns and put some stuff in that would assist them. But you did not put anything in the law that was going to inhibit the free exercise of our Second Amendment right. Nothing that we did to address their concerns hurt the core purpose of that section of the bill. Is that right?
Correct.
What'd you have, Scott?
I just wanted to touch on, as Representative Holt mentioned, the 18 other states that do have permitless carry. Richard mentioned the number of permits increasing since Iowa moved to shall issue from 30,000 to 400,000. We anticipate that the number of permits is going to continue to rise, because in the 17 states, because Vermont never had a permit in the first place, the 17 states who have passed permitless carry have seen those numbers of permits increase. You know, folks still need a permit to travel out of state and have reciprocity. They still need it satisfy the requirements of the Federal Gun-Free School Zones Act. Many folks, like myself, I use my permit as a NICS exemption. So we do anticipate the number of permits will continue to increase.
I agree with that. I think that they will. Folks who want reciprocity to carry out of state, they don't want to get their background check every time they go to the gun store to get a firearm. I think there'll be a lot of folks that will continue to get those permits. I want to mention one thing I've been thinking about in the last 24 hours. Another compelling and I think profoundly important reason that we do what we just did. If you look at a lot of states that have a so-called permit system, there haven't been permits issued in years because they made this thing so onerous and so ridiculous as to basically it be a right on paper and nobody gets a permit. If you heard the debate that we had on this bill from those, most of the Democrats, one Democrat voted for it, but most of the Democrats, if you listen to the debate, for instance, from Representative Bruce Hunter, he had an amendment that basically would make it impossible, would have modified the permit process to make it impossible to get a permit. By having a permit process in place without constitutional carry, if the folks who respect the Second Amendment are no longer in control of Iowa government, they could take that permit process and they could turn it into something where no law-abiding citizen can actually get a permit in reality. By going to constitutional carry and having the permit process optional, I would submit it is going to be much more difficult if they were to ever get in control to walk back away from that as compared to being able to just modify the permit process and basically destroy it so that folks couldn't get a permit to carry. And so I think that is one of the most important reasons. What we did will be much more difficult for them to walk back once Iowans have gotten used to it and see that the wild west didn't take place like and all of the other garbage that they talked about on the floor, because they don't trust citizens. That's the reality. They don't trust law-abiding, free people for making good decisions. They just think we're too stupid and we have to be mandated what we do by government. And it's very disturbing. Everybody should watch that debate so they understand what the other side looks like and how they think.
I have a question, Steve. Pardon me, Representative Holt. I'm trying to make it as quick and as simple for you as possible. We had a single Democrat vote with all the Republicans for this the other night when we're talking about the constitutional carry bill and all its components. And you also touched on earlier about the change from may issue to shall issue a dozen years ago. The same arguments, because I was there and listened to both of them, or watched both of them. The same arguments were present both times. There's going to be blood in the streets. Iowa's not going to be safe. All this calamity and chaos is going to happen. And it's as if nobody has learned anything over their time, understanding that when you bestow choices for people and you elevate character, the good things happen as a result if you allow it and encourage it, if you incentivize it. What's the disconnect there? I mean, why don't other people understand this? Can you kind of shed some light on? I mean, you work among these folks all day long.
It is amazing to me that folks don't see that the criminals out there, they don't care what we put in code.
Right.
The folks that, if you put a sign up that says gun-free zone, this is what blows me away. If you put up a sign that says gun-free zone, who is going to respect that? The law-abiding citizens are going to respect that, and you're going to disarm the law-abiding citizens. You're not going to disarm the criminal. You're not going to disarm the thug. You're not going to disarm the bad guy who is going to go in there and have a shooting gallery of innocent people. The same thing applies here. No matter what we legislate, it is really to the law-abiding citizens, and they just don't seem to understand that the criminals, the bad guys, don't care what we put in code. They don't care about our permit process. They don't care about background checks. They're going to. That's why they're called criminals, folks, and they're going to get those firearms illegally. And so, what we want to make sure we're doing is respect the law-abiding citizens in the laws that we put in place. And so, I don't understand that. I will never I think it's a level of naiveness that blows me away. One of the Democrats during the discussion made the comment that they felt safer by the permit process or what have you. It's the same way that if people feel safe by a gun-free zone, I think it's just the opposite. I think that makes people less safe. And so I don't pretend to understand that mindset. I don't understand it at all because I don't think it makes any sense at all.
Richard, did you have something?
Yes, Representative, you just touched on something about the debate and about the mindset of these folks, the gun-free zone signs, the magic signs, and so on. We're preaching to the choir here. Most people, at least initially, that watch this will be in the Second Amendment community and maybe gun owners and so on. But hopefully later it'll get a little broader coverage. But I want to give people in our community some ammunition to get, when they're confronted with people who use the arguments or what they heard from, say, the other side the other night in the debate. Let's talk about that. So I have maybe a short series of questions here that you don't have to be yes or no answers, but a short answer, and then when we're done with that, you can expand on it. Again, we talk about you have experience in law enforcement. So very first, how often would you say, this is basically on the permit to acquire situation, how often is law enforcement there to stop a crime before it happens? I realize once in a while you might be called to a fight or a disturbance or something, and maybe somebody picks up a club or a knife and starts to assault somebody, and you might stop that. But generally with robberies and assaults and break-ins and even murders, how often is law enforcement on the scene to stop that?
Well, almost never. I mean, that's just a reality, almost never.
And so you're talking about somebody being able to go, if they're suddenly in a threatening situation, they feel threatened, they would be able to go to a store and buy a gun legally in compliance with federal background checks and so on, but without this permit in Iowa, without having to go to apply to the sheriff and wait for it and pay for it and figure out how to do it in the first place. And so that's important because law enforcement can't be there and we need to take responsibility. But things were said the other night about felons buying guns. This was going to enable felons and domestic abusers and I guess youth to go out and buy guns. Can a felon legally buy a gun now?
Absolutely
from anybody?
Not now, or not in the legislation that we just passed.
Do they get guns now?
Absolutely, because they don't respect the laws. We just don't.
People are willing to sell them or they steal them. Yeah. Can underage people buy guns now legally?
No.
No. And do they get them? Yes.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Does anything in this bill make it easier for felons or underage or domestic abusers or mentally disabled people to legally obtain firearms?
Absolutely not.
No. And I think that's the point to make. In the discussion, and frankly, even in the defense of the provision, when it got on the permit to acquire and background checks and so on, there are penalties in the law for selling to somebody you know or should reasonably know is prohibited from receiving a firearm. And those are very strict penalties. They're stricter now than they were prior. They're also strict under federal law. I think it's a minimum 10-year penalty if you do this. And it's the same, or reasonably should know. But frankly, those laws are intended not to keep me or you or somebody else from selling off an excess gun to somebody they don't know who might be a bad guy and they don't really have any way of knowing it. It's not that. It's for the people who is to be used to prosecute the people who knowingly are selling to bad people, to gangbangers, to underage. If you can tell somebody's underage and he shouldn't have this gun, but you go ahead and sell it to him anyway, that should be a felony, and it will be now. And it is under federal law. And the same thing, if you know that this guy in your neighborhood is a bad dude, and that's why you're charging him a 400% markup because he can't go to the store and buy a gun, or he can't go to an honest citizen because an honest citizen is going to want some evidence that he's not selling to a crook. So he goes to the black market. All of that's still illegal with increased penalties. And so that's the answer to people, because these were ridiculous arguments that were placed forth. They weren't even really arguments. They were just statements. And as you said in your summation, saying it over and over and over again doesn't make it true.
Yeah. It was a lot of emotion based on, either ignorance of what the bill actually did or purposeful and intended disinformation. I mean, I don't pretend to know which it was, but there were so many things said on the floor by the Democrats in opposition to this bill that were factually inaccurate, and they said them over and over again. Even after we pointed out, for instance, that is not accurate, they continue to say it.
Does anybody have anything else? Because I've got one thing that dawned on me that I'd like to toss out there real quick.
Go ahead.
I don't know why I didn't catch this before. I kind of feel silly about it, but I think Representative Holt, you mentioned that people were saying in the debate, and I think I recall this now, that they said, well, I'd feel safer if they had the permit. I'd be okay with that. Now, back up 12 years ago, and people were screaming, and they were saying, you can't do this. There'll be blood in the streets. I remember hearing blood in the streets if we do this, if people are granted permits. That's what we heard. And so it was a wrong assertion then, but it's been proven now that Iowans, permit or not, can handle being decent people. They have largely been decent people all this while. And so it would seem to me, in terms of logic, that they just stood up on the floor and said, I was really, really wrong 12 years ago, and I'm proving that to you now. And what we should be saying back to them is, we appreciate that recognition. And oh, by the way, you're wrong again. And you've got a fundamental flaw in your ideology. And unfortunately, instead of applying that to yourself, you're applying that to 3 million people, and that's wrong.
Yep, absolutely. I've said over and over again in numerous debates on the Second Amendment that it's not about the gun, it's about the character of the person holding the gun.
Yes.
It has been clearly demonstrated with the changes we've made. Iowa's one of the safest states in the country. Iowans are of good character. And they just, you know, what profoundly disturbs me in whatever debate we're having is that there is that attitude that they don't trust citizens. They don't trust free men and women to make good decisions, and they think that government, the heavy hand of government, has to come in and dictate. And boy, you know, I'm very concerned because that kind of mindset, if those folks are ever in control in a big way, we're going to lose a lot of freedoms because they just don't trust. They just don't trust free men and women, and that needs to be a concern for all of us.
Okay, well, I think go ahead, Richard.
A couple of things. One, that brings up our constitutional amendment, because people confuse constitutional carry, which the representatives use that term here, and our constitutional amendment, which will be on the ballot in 2020 and 2022. Watch IFC for a lot of forthcoming information on how we're going to advocate to get that passed by a vote of the people. But I think what he mentioned earlier about this measure will help if it ever goes to the courts, or even in the political process, keep them from rolling back some of the advances that we've made. The constitutional, adding right to keep and bear arms to our state constitution will be the ultimate thing there to keep that from happening in the future. But I want to ask him, you know, I mentioned that you were in the Marines for 20 years, representative, law enforcement. You've taken the oath to protect the Constitution a number of times, and I know that you actually believe that. And I don't believe that you do this and put all this effort in because you're a gun enthusiast or firearms enthusiast, as one of the members of your public safety committee keeps terming it. I know you do it for other reasons, and I see the sign behind you, Freedom Watch. And I wanted to ask you to mention maybe what that is. You have a video that you do regularly, as well as a newsletter, and maybe how people could get that.
Yeah, well, thank you. Every couple of weeks or so, I do what's called a Freedom Watch video, which is also what my newsletter is called. Because when I originally ran for office, it was because I woke up one morning 7 years ago when Senator Jason Schultz, or 8 years ago, Senator Jason Schultz had decided he was the state representative at the time. He was going to run for the Senate, and he had asked me if I'd think about running because he knew what my beliefs were. And I just woke up one morning realizing, as I'd been looking at the news, that I was starting to not recognize my country anymore, that our freedoms were under assault in a way that I never thought I would see in our country anymore. And I would talk about this in relation to the Second Amendment. We're having divisive Marxist concepts taught in our schools today, that there's only two groups of people, oppressor and oppressed. There are so many forces at work to undermine our liberty and undermine our freedom. That is why I chose to call my newsletter Freedom Watch and my video Freedom Watch, because that's, I think, what we all have to be doing today. We have to guard our freedom because it is under assault as never before in our country. I don't believe, whether it be World War II or any other time in our history, I'm not sure that the future of our children and their liberty has ever been under threat more than it is in 2021, in terms of what so many of those, you know, there was a time when there were a lot of shared values between all Americans of both political parties. That's just not as true anymore. A lot of those shared values aren't there anymore. I think there is a very radical element that has taken over, for the most part. The Democrat Party and what they advocate for would not only destroy the Second Amendment, but it would destroy everything that we believe our country to be. And so that is why I sort of try to bear that in mind, and that is why I called it Freedom Watch. So thank you for asking that. I think we all, every one of us, had better start guarding our freedom, because I think we're in a very, very troubling time in our country, and patriots need to stand up and fight. And when I say the word fight, I don't mean take to the streets. I'm talking about fighting by electing representatives to government who are going to stand up for freedom and stand up for liberty and stand up for the principles we've been talking about in the last few minutes.
Well, thank you. And how can people find that, Freedom Watch?
Oh, thank you. So I have a Facebook page. You can put in Holt for Iowa House. I have a Facebook page there where I post my weekly newsletter, as well as when I post the Freedom Watch videos there as well.
I can put those things. We're going to host this on YouTube. I can put those things in the description with links.
Perfect. They could also, if they want to subscribe to my newsletter, they can email me at my legislative address, which is stephen.holt, steven.holt@legis.iowa.gov, and just put the word subscribe in the title line, and we will add you, and you'll get the weekly newsletter.
I'll put that in too.
Perfect.
All right, Scott, anything left?
Just again, want to thank you, Rep. Holt. You mentioned earlier the strength of your freshman class, and I know Richard and I have gotten a feel for that with all the members that we've met so far. I think that the divisive political environment that we're currently living in the seemingly endless stall at the federal level has really prompted folks to run at the state level who are ready and willing to get in and do the dirty work and fight the fight. So I really appreciate you and your caucus all standing together as one, all 59 members of you and the one Democrat, to fight head on for progress in the state of Iowa. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you guys for all the work you do.
My thanks, Representative Holt, Richard, always. I know that you put in a lot of time, a lot of hours. Same thing with you, Scott. I enjoy working with you guys. And as we close this video out, for those people watching, I want to ask a very important question, which has been it's been running around in my head the last few days, and I've had these discussions with my wife, some friends, to bounce it off and to make sure that I was grounded in what I was about to offer you. And the reality is when we look at things like the constitutional amendment that's being put forth on the ballot, the constitutional carry provision that the Iowa House just undertook, what we're really talking about is the core ideology that surrounds freedom. And we should be asking ourselves, what is freedom? Because I don't think many people actually ask that question. What is freedom and how does it manifest itself? How does that apply to me? And what do I do with freedom? The truth is freedom, it can be interpreted as the ability to act on whim or do whimsical or random things. But the truth is, this may sound a little odd as a Second Amendment advocate, but I'm less concerned about the word freedom and less concerned about the word right as I am about responsibility, because those things come with freedom and those things come with rights, because you're making choices. There are forks in the road and you're trying to decide which one you should take and why. And because of responsibility, we understand with those choices comes consequence. So really what we're saying with freedom allows us to elevate and embrace responsibility. And with responsibility comes disciplines. And disciplines in life manifest themselves as meaning and purpose. So when I look at what the Iowa House just did, and what I believe that the Senate will take up right away and is highly likely to follow suit, we've got a governor that's quite willing to go with us on this. I don't anticipate any problems there, but it's the future. It's yet to be seen. What we're really talking about is the Iowa House has said, with only one Democrat, unfortunately, that they love us, they care about us, and they're willing and wanting to see us enjoy freedom, that they expect responsibility, and that they're elevating the character of Iowans and allowing that to take place. And I think that that's absolutely fantastic. That is the way that we should be going. This is the return that we should be making, and I'm very, very glad to see it. So with that, again, thank you, Representative Holt, Richard, Scott. You guys have worked very hard. I appreciate it. Thank you guys, and stay safe out there, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wise words, Michael.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better, Michael. That was great.